some of the changes recently that our state's undergone in terms of abortion law. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you, Julie, for the invitation. And I know if everyone's going to be on Pinterest working on their Halloween costumes while I'm talking, that's fine with me, you know. But good day to be here on Halloween. Happy Halloween, everybody. Okay, so I'm going to share a lot. I hope I'm not covering too much ground, but I feel like the opportunity to share. I appreciate that opportunity. So just some guests with me that came with us today that I'd like to just recognize and introduce. Sarah Zgorski is our Communications Director at Louisiana Right to Life. Alexandra Sager is our Director of Education. Dr. Evelyn Griffin is an OBGYN and a friend of ours. So thank you, Dr. Griffin, for being here. And then Tara and Mike Wicker. Tara runs our state Louisiana Black Advocates for Life outreach, and so glad to have y'all here as well with us. Tara is a former city councilwoman here in Baton Rouge. From January 22nd, 1973 until June 24th of this year, a federal judicial fiat forced Louisiana to allow abortion for virtually any reason or really no reason at all in Louisiana. What was the result of that? Our numbers show that from the Department of Health that over 534,473 living human beings waiting to be born in Louisiana in those nearly 50 years were deprived of the right to life in Louisiana. This equates to over 5 times the capacity of Tiger Stadium. If it wasn't for legal abortion, thousands upon thousands of human beings would be alive today in Louisiana. Many of these people would have children of their own today, but sadly, they're not here with us. We believe that this is a fundamental violation of human rights in our state. And this is the core of what motivates us to be advocates for the right to life, advocates for unborn children. And I think we should have no illusions about what abortion does to unborn children. I think that's something that is too often forgotten about and not really covered in the discussion about abortion, is that abortion is a violent and brutal act that takes the life of a living unborn child. Children who generally their hearts are beating, they have brain waves, they're living in their mother's womb, and abortion destroys their little body and their little life. I've also been inspired by the thousands of women in this country who regret their abortion. Women that I know personally who shared their stories with me, and who many of them are the most active and courageous pro-life advocates defending life in our state. So, and unfortunately, these are some of the realities that we see as missed in the debate and the discussion about abortion and in the coverage about abortion as well. What would our state be like if these 534,000 unborn children would be alive today? Thankfully, Roe versus Wade was repudiated by a principled majority of Supreme Court justices willing to interpret the Constitution faithfully despite extreme threats and intimidation. We're fortunate that a Louisiana and Metairie native, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, was on that majority. And with that decision, Louisiana was once again able to protect the lives of all her citizens, including those waiting to be born. We took a look at the statistics of abortion last year in Louisiana, and we estimate that so far since Roe v. Wade being overturned, 2,512 unborn babies have been protected by our law since that time, and all 3 abortion facilities in Louisiana have closed. I think for the public's information, it's important for us to remind people over and over again that Roe v. Wade being overturned doesn't make abortion illegal across the country. It returns the issue to the state, to the democratic process, and as we've seen, different states take different paths to addressing abortion policy in their state. In Louisiana, we protected babies before Roe v. Wade, and now we're protecting babies in a post-Roe Louisiana. For us in the pro-life movement, our goals have always been simple, and they always will be pretty simple: to protect every life and to help every mom. That's what we've done for half a century, and it's what we will continue to do. Through pregnancy resource centers, adoption agencies, other social services, the pro-life movement has been and still is love in action, serving women and children day in and day out, whether abortion's legal or not. And that doesn't change for us. We believe and we know there's an abundance of private and public resources in Louisiana to help women before and after birth. There are over 40 pregnancy help centers tucked in every little corner of Louisiana, helping women at no cost to them before and after birth, sometimes up to 2 or even 4 years after the baby is born. We've published the website findhelpla.com, where a person can use their zip code and they can find resources near them in the state. Now, those resources obviously include pregnancy help centers, but they also include a variety of assistance, such as housing assistance, financial assistance, employment assistance, and so much more that someone can access. And we want to continue to build that list and make sure that we continue to promote it. Our organization advertises that, and we encourage the media to assist in communicating the resources that are available in the state. And we're working with partners across the state to continue to strengthen those resources. Last legislative session, the legislature increased the state funding of pregnancy resource centers and alternatives to abortion to $2.2 million a year. There was an additional $1 million allocated for a telehealth care continuum of care program. These appropriations were made with our enthusiastic support. We're going to continue to advocate for additional resources. Another essential element of our work has always been the promotion of the beauty of infant adoption. It's critical for what we believe is the present, the past, and the future of our effort. I'm always impacted by and inspired by the people who've been impacted by adoption. Just 2 quick stories. The recent film Lifemark, it hit theaters in September. It was based on our documentary that we produced called I Lived on Parker Avenue, and it follows the story of David Scotton, who was born in Indiana. His mother she was in the abortion facility, but right before the abortion happened, she got off the table, walked out the door, and she didn't give her baby up for adoption. She placed David for adoption into a loving family here in Metairie. David is an LSU grad, and our story follows David to meet his birth parents for the first time. You know, David is his parents' only living child. Susan had 2 other children who died shortly after birth. Very sad story. And then David is his grandparents, Roy and Gail, their only grandchild. And he's making a positive impact on other people's life. So, and if it wasn't for the courage of his birth mother, Melissa, and the adoption option, David might not be with us here today. Not today in this room, as you understand. Okay, second story is a friend of ours named Kim. She was a 15-year-old student in Metairie in high school when she became pregnant. She considered abortion, even visited an abortion facility herself. But after the help of other people and considering the resources that are there, she chose adoption, again, placing, not giving up. We want to change that language when we talk about adoption. Placing her child for adoption. Her son, birth son, has grown up. He recently graduated from LSU. Kim went on with her life, eventually got married, has other children of her own today. It was through an open adoption, so they still have a great relationship today. So as these and other countless stories demonstrate, adoption is a solution that gives a baby life, helps the mother in her time of need, and blesses other parents with the gift of family. Many situations they can't have children of their own. I think we can come together in Louisiana to continue to strengthen and promote adoption for people. Okay, the overturning of Roe v. Wade certainly was a dramatic change in the legal landscape in America. With the laws of 14 states, at least right now, protecting all or a significant number of unborn babies in those states, it's been a long overdue shift in nearly 50 years of abortion on demand in the state. And we understand that laws, especially like this, they take some time to settle in, right? Naturally, people have questions about what is and is not allowed in Louisiana law. And I just would like to address that our laws are very clear. They have always been aimed at protecting babies from intentional elective abortion. Since the 70s, our organization has advocated for that at the legislature. This is critical for everyone in Louisiana to understand. Abortion, elective abortion, is not health care. It's an elective procedure that ends the life of an innocent unborn child. So let's get into details about what the legislature laid out as not included as an elective abortion in our law. Number one, our law is clear that doctors can care for women and save the lives of women in life-threatening medical emergencies. If you've reviewed our legislative advocacy for decades, we've always included what we generally refer to as a life of the mother exception in legislation. Our laws repeatedly defer to good faith medical judgment that physicians must exercise in medical emergencies, and they can exercise, We are not here to critique difficult decisions that doctors make in these life-threatening moments in medical emergencies. And I believe our law enforcement and our legislators agree wholeheartedly with me on this. We are pro-life, we are pro-woman, we're pro-child at the same time. This includes ectopic pregnancies. The law makes no difference or makes no impact on a physician's ability to impact or to save the life of a woman who's facing an ectopic pregnancy. And Dr. Griffin's here, and we've talked thoroughly about this, and other doctors as well. In fact, we published a letter recently signed by a group of obstetricians and gynecologists who address in detail our state's laws from a medical perspective, and we have some copies of that with us today. Among other things, the physicians say Louisiana law in a post-Roe world protects physicians' ability to care for their patients in emergencies. We don't think that has changed. Our law is not meant to be a overbearing or step-by-step guide for physicians. Again, so many times the phrase "we're deferring to the good faith medical judgment of physicians in these situations" is really important. Let me say that we're open to reviewing any potential tweaks to the law to address concerns from physicians or to improve the law in general. But we will oppose any changes that, whether intentionally or unintentionally, open loopholes to allow elective abortions. There have been questions about the law, and we understand that, but we do feel there's been a certain amount of possibly manufactured concerns over the law, oftentimes brought about by people who prefer for abortion to be legal in all situations, right? And we understand there's a difference of opinion on that, but many times people who support an abortion-on-demand mentality have been driving the kind of concern and fears about these other situations regarding our law. And we encourage the media to not necessarily feed into that narrative, but make sure that we're actually reporting on what the law says and what alternative physicians and doctors may have to say about what the law does and does not say about what is allowed. We find oftentimes that maybe the media coverage is not necessarily, it generally begins from a perspective that the pro-life movement is almost incorrect in the situation, and we have to come on kind of a defensive perspective too often. And, we think often the coverage doesn't also address maybe the fact that abortion does take the life of these unborn children, and what's the impact of that in our society. A couple things that I'm sure you're going to ask me questions about, so I might as well address. First is I'd like to talk about how our law protects babies who have been conceived through rape and incest. Rape and incest are unspeakable crimes. Those who commit sexual violence of any kind, including rape and incest, should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And we need to offer as much support and compassion to victims as we possibly can. We recognize the horrific trauma that women experience. As we consider this incredibly difficult issue, it's important that we return to a core principle of the pro-life cause. The circumstances of a child's conception have no bearing on his or her human dignity and do not impair his or her right to life. Every life is valuable, no matter what brought them into this world. And we believe as an organization, we're going to continue to protect those unborn children. Abortion doesn't solve the problem of rape and incest in these situations. This makes me think of a friend of mine named Dustin. He lives in the Lafayette area. Dustin's mother was raped in a horrific manner at the age of 25. Very, very disappointing. The actions of the rapist were horrific, terrible, and awful, and Dustin will say this himself when he speaks and shares his story. Through all the pain, however, Dustin's mother gave birth to him, gave him the gift of life, and as he shared with me, they've made memories together to last a lifetime. Dustin is now a young man who leads a ministry to inspire young people in their faith and their personal development. He's making a life in the lives of other people, and thanks his mother for that gift of life, even through the most horrific situation that she could have experienced. There are others as well who inspire me, especially the women I know who chose life after being victimized through rape and incest. Not one of them that I know regrets their choice to give their child the gift of life. No unborn child should be punished by death for the sins of his or her father. We will never waver from this core principle, and we deeply appreciate the support we have received in the past from legislators and leaders in Louisiana with this point. We're going to continue to work at the legislature to oppose laws that may allow more elective abortions in any capacity in any way. Finally, I'd like to address the issue of medical futility that's certainly been a hot topic as of late. So over our objection at the legislature, which we've said, the exception for medical futility was added to the law. And just as a summary, this allows abortion in cases where two doctors agree that the unborn child's condition make the child, quote, incompatible with life outside the womb. Whether we like it or not as an organization, a simple reading of the law makes it very clear that these abortions are legal right now in Louisiana. The list that was created by the Department of Health was initiated by legislators who wanted to make sure that it couldn't be too overbroad, right? And that it wouldn't include conditions that were not defined or could not be defined as incompatible with life. One that comes to mind certainly is a child that is diagnosed with Down syndrome, right? That is a condition that's not, quote, incompatible with life outside the womb. It's not on the list. And thankfully, our law protects those children who are diagnosed with Down syndrome in the womb. Now, we did write to the Department of Health, and we weren't able to be at the hearing for a lot of reasons, but we did write to the Department of Health that trisomy 13 and 18 should not be included in the list because they do not meet the definition of a condition that's incompatible with life outside the womb. And I'm going to cover on that in just a second. You know, to be clear, Louisiana Right to Life opposes the exception to medical futility. That shouldn't be a surprise. And this is because of our pro-life principles that every life is valuable. Every human person, even if they are disabled, born or unborn, deserves their full lifespan, whether their lifespan is short or long. We should never kill another person because they are sick or disabled. I want to tell you about two people two stories. One is a cute little girl named Mary Teresa. Mary Teresa lives in Clinton, Louisiana. When her mother was pregnant, Teresa was diagnosed with trisomy 18 in the womb. Her mother was told that Mary Teresa would not live long. However, Mary Teresa is 1.5 today and still alive. Here she is, her picture. She's a sweet child, brings life and joy into her family, and she's still alive today. Certainly, caring for Mary Teresa hasn't been easy, but her parents would tell you it's been a blessing to their family. And this is part of the conditions that we've written to the Department of Health and Hospital about not allowing. Now, every situation is not as positive as Mary Teresa, but we should still protect the lives of babies even if they do pass away shortly after birth. Let me tell you about a friend of mine who had a baby named Tess. Our friends were diagnosed with trisomy 13 at 20 weeks in the womb. Their baby Tess was, and told Tess would not live long. They were recommended to have an abortion in that situation. But my friend did not choose abortion. Tess was born, and she only lived for 9 hours. While her life was short, my friend shares that Tess was a blessing to her family. This is what she wrote. When we first received Tess's diagnosis and were told she was, quote, incompatible with life, end quote, it truly broke our hearts. We had thought we had been handed a death sentence. But really, it was not a death sentence. She was still alive. I felt her moving. My kids felt her kicks. And while we did not know what the future would hold, in her 9 hours of life on this earth, outside of the womb, we had the privilege of having her baptized, petting her sweet head, holding her little hand. Family members got to visit her and tell her hello and goodbye. She was showered with love every second she was with us. Obviously, it was not the diagnosis we wanted, but the journey was truly beautiful, and I feel incredibly privileged to be her mom. She also shared with me that the St. Patrick's Day after Tess died, one of her older children had to do a project at school where they make a shamrock, and they have to say on there the things that they're lucky for in life. And her daughter put a picture of Tess on the Shamrock. Just what a beautiful perspective from a child who was positively impacted by a baby test. They still celebrate her birthday every year. Look, we know these diagnoses are heartbreaking for any family that faces them, for the family, especially for the mother. But every child deserves the full chance at life and their chance to beat the odds as well, as Mary Teresa has. We need to provide prenatal palliative care from the moment of that diagnosis all the way to the child's natural death. We are building up a list of families like these families who have been through these situations and can be a resource to those who go through these situations, can help walk with them, help them, give them guidance and advice. There's also a national group called Prenatal Partners for Life who does the same thing on a natural from the natural end. In conclusion, we are proud that we are protecting the lives of innocent babies from abortion in Louisiana. We are also happy in Louisiana that women can find help and support, and we're going to continue to work to strengthen that. Our focus at Louisiana Right to Life is to keep Louisiana pro-life through our legislation and our education, to help mothers and expand the resources available to moms, to promote adoption, and to continue to build a future where every child is protected by law and welcomed with love in our world. Thank you. Yes.
What is your response to, while there is the medically futile list in place right now, the doctors say that it's nearly impossible to have every possible scenario on that list that mothers may not want to put their child through, may not want to go through the heartbreak of birthing a child for it to die. So what's your response to them saying that it's kind of impossible to make a whole comprehensive medically futile list?
Sure. Well, certainly, to be clear, again, our organization doesn't support the exception in general in the case. Now, the list has, and I'm not speaking for the Attorney General and legislators, but the list does include that last provision that basically opens the door to anything that two doctors determine fit under the definition of medical futility. But our message is that we've been inspired by the people, like I shared today, who have been through these difficult, heartbreaking situations and can provide to us the advice that abortion didn't solve the situation for them, and for the ability for them to be able to have their child even die in their mom and dad's arms versus through the tools of an abortionist. We believe, that's the solution that we can rally around to give every child the chance to their full lifespan.
And just to follow up on that, would you be in support, or are you going to try and bring legislation next year to remove the medically futile list?
We would support removing the medical futile list. We're still figuring out exactly what our priorities are for the next legislative session, but we would support efforts to remove that exception. Yeah.
I'm going to apologize in advance. This is going to be a long question. So
All right. I just spoke for a long time, so that's all right.
In
Yeah.
response to,
I'm going to get some water while you're...
Okay. So in response to some records requests I made, I have seen comments from doctors. These are not doctors that have signed on to affidavits challenging the law or appeared at hearings or really been very public about their concerns about the law. Nevertheless, these are people who work at Women's, Street Court, Ochsner, big hospitals that provide a lot of care, who have said unequivocally that they feel like they and their colleagues are scared to do certain types of procedures. And they mentioned specifically treating hemorrhaging, treating ectopic pregnancies, ruptured membranes. Again, these are not people, they even went out of their way to say, we don't do abortions and never did abortions. But they say that doctors are scared to treat things that they normally would have treated primarily because the Attorney General sent this letter to all the physicians in our state saying that they better be concerned about being prosecuted. One doctor specifically said, I had a patient who was 16 weeks pregnant with twins. There were deaths involved, and he had a hard time finding a physician who would perform the procedure to remove dead children or fetuses, depending on how you feel, from this woman because people were just so scared of doing anything that might bring scrutiny on them. So I think that's a real fear, and I don't think it's just like maybe some doctors who are pro-choice who, like in favor of abortion rights coming out and just kind of saying what they're saying about the law. I'm curious about whether you think it was the appropriate move for the Attorney General to send out that letter, and what you think should be done to ensure doctors who are treating conditions who really aren't abortions, right, to make sure that they feel like they can do it. I also heard from doctors who said, we don't know who would cover us. We don't know if our insurance would kick in. We don't know if the hospital would represent us if we got charged. And we have, it's not just the Attorney General, but a prosecutor. You might have a family who for some reason thinks something nefarious happened and goes to a prosecutor, and then the prosecutor starts investigating the doctor. Regardless of whether we think this would happen, they were very clear that there was a lot of fear about this. And they said there's fear about people coming to work in this state, being residents in this state, being doctors in this state, doctors in training, not because the doctors want to provide abortions, but because they are afraid they'll come here and they might face criminal charges for doing their job.
Yeah.
So I know that's a lot, but I don't know. I kind of want to hear what you are saying about that, because I have to say that's pretty concerning when people are saying our doctors are scared to treat hemorrhages.
Right. Yeah, well, certainly we have, like I said kind of in my remarks, that, we don't have any interest in scaring doctors who are trying to help serve women in medical emergencies. The many things I listed out that are clearly exempted out in our law. Certainly you mentioned miscarriage, that, that's very clearly, and that's been exempted out for decades in these laws. Now certainly these laws didn't go into effect until this year, right? But they were in effect before 1973, and I know that was nearly 50 years ago, right? But we do have precedent of the laws being in effect in the past, and it apparently working at that time, and then it now goes back into effect. And I think there's some time that, again, like I said, that the dust has to settle, and that's, to me, part of our kind of frustration with Roe v. Wade, and that it becomes an issue where there's no buildup in a legislature to handle these issues, because it's Roe v. Wade takes away the right of a state to address these issues until, bam, in one fell swoop, the paradigm shifts, right? So I think it's important that physicians and groups of physicians look at what our law says, and they make sure that we go by what the law says rather than what might be.
Cut you off, but who should they be asking about that? Like, if they have a question, some of these doctors have very specific questions. Like, if this is on the list, do I have to abide by the waiting period that I used to for an abortion, or since it's not an abortion? I would love to hear your response, but I think people are confused about who they even ask. Because to be honest, the Department of Health is not answering some of these questions.
Well, I think certainly and again, like I said earlier, the law is never meant to be like a playbook for doctors, right? A step-by-step manual for doctors, right? It sets principles, it sets guidelines, and then it defers to the good faith medical judgment of physicians. And as I said, law enforcement, I believe, is going to respect those decisions. And again, I'm not going to make a blanket statement always, right? But certainly that's going to be the case in a general way, because the law, I think in one section of the law, we repeat the word good faith medical judgment 3 or 4 times in that situation. So, now like I said earlier, I think if physicians and groups of physicians have specific concerns about the laws, like I said, I'd love to hear those things specifically, and obviously we're not representative here is you're going to be the final verdict on this, not me, but I'd love to be in conversations about that, because we'd like to hear how it can be improved, right? These laws were written to the best of legislators' ability to address these situations. If it can be improved to do that, then let's improve them and make them better, And, and I have encouraged the Attorney General's office, if you listen to some of the it wasn't in the First Circuit, it was in the Baton Rouge courthouse here when they were arguing the cases in the summer, right? The Attorney General's attorneys went very clearly through the entire law, made specific things. I think the more information that's put out like that is very informative, and that's what we've tried to do. Obviously, you shouldn't ask us for legal advice; physicians shouldn't. But we've tried to very clearly go through the law to address those things. The more things that, whether it's the Board of Medical Examiner, the state group of physicians whose name escapes me at the moment, the Attorney General's office, the Department of Health can put out. But again, there's going to be no advice that's going to cover every single situation that comes out, and that's why the guidance of the law and deferring to the good faith medical judgment of physicians is important in that situation.
Hey,
Yeah.
Ben, I know you just said that the agenda isn't quite set yet, but I was wondering if you could tell us more about what y'all's priorities are going to be.
I think our main priority is to keep our laws at least at the point of where they are, right? I mean, there's been a dramatic shift in what is legal and not legal in Louisiana. So I think the priority is going to be keeping Louisiana pro-life, making sure that we're not allowing more elective abortions, and then seeing if we can work to ways to improve the law with the feedback of physicians or groups to evaluate if we can continue to improve it to address any of these concerns.
Just a quick question on the last provision on the Department of Health list, dealing with the one or two licensed physicians.
Right.
Some argue that not every mother in the state can afford to go to more than one licensed physician and get that recommendation. I'd just like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that was put in place by the legislature just to ensure there is some sort of checks and balance in that situation. I mean, we're literally making a life and death decision for a human being who's living, and I think that's a prudent thing for the legislature to do to ensure that there are checks and balances. There have been physicians in this state who have happily done elective abortion for years, and so we think that's a good policy to have to ensure that. And I think the physician, I just think that's a good policy to have and to put in place. And certainly, as I've shared before, there are families that can provide insight, can provide guidance to everything in those situations who've been through similar things.
Just a quick follow-up. Have you been in contact or had conversations with any pro-choice legislators about any kind of compromise or work that you guys can do together?
Since the session ended?
Correct.
We really haven't talked to a whole lot of legislators since the session ended. So no, there have been no conversations. We're always open to having conversations,
Any reached out to you?
There have been none that have reached out to me, to my recollection at this moment in time. I don't know if I don't again. Okay, Dr. Griffin.
If I may comment on the last question regarding medical futility.
And Dr. Griffin's going to know a heck of a lot more on all these topics than I will.
Is that okay?
Sure.
Regarding the medical futility clause, as a physician, we, specifically an obstetrician gynecologist, we are trained so that we have to have two physicians make that determination of incompatibility with life. So that is not on the patient's onus or administration's onus, it is on ours. A obstetrician gynecologist gets their recommendations on practice from American College of OBGYN. So that is something that is, if one physician is to claim medical futility, it is on them to summon another physician in for that final diagnosis. Regarding earlier comments, thank you for those comments because they're very important comments. I feel, in my own opinion, that Attorney General was helping provide clarity with his comments in a moment in history where that was needed. Now, he was providing those comments from a legal perspective, so it comes across as a legal issue. But I would like to return back to how Ben very eloquently mentioned that in healthcare, abortion was never part of necessary medical care. And when I say that, I mean elective abortions. So when we are dealing with medical emergencies, we are trained as physicians on, number one, preserving life and what an emergency is. So a hemorrhage is not a casual vaginal bleeding, it is life-threatening. So physicians are trained by their definitions on what an emergency is, but then again, within the law, there is the good faith medical judgment that every physician has to turn on in their practice. So I would point physicians to, first of all, knowing the law, which we all should know from the beginning anyways, which is Act 545, our Louisiana law, and reading it. There are wonderful summaries and explanations of this law on many sites, including the Right to Life site. And then secondarily, once familiar with the law, then examining their own practice and seeing if they are practicing correctly within this law. So I think that's just an examination of practice, examination of conscience that every physician should do in their practice regardless, so that they don't step into an emergency caught off guard. Medical emergencies do arise unexpectedly, but that's when that good faith medical judgment kicks in. And then finally, for physicians who are in group practices, it's helpful because you can discuss with other colleagues of yours, practice managers, lawyers that address their medical malpractice insurance. They can have those discussions. And then finally, large organizations already have those departments built in that advise and are in communication with their OBGYNs and practicing providers from the beginning of the overturn of Roe versus Wade. Does that help clarify?
I would say one of the other complaints that this group of doctors had was that they feel like now, I believe they all work at hospitals, they're being pulled in on a case-by-case basis into these committee meetings in the hospital about what to do about every single case, and they sort of said this is, I hate to put it this way, but like a time suck. Like it's not very good, that it's not efficient. Now, I don't know, whether that's the best way to do it or not, but I think that they feel like there's just not even clarity from their hospital's attorney about where the line is.
So as a practicing physician previously I was practicing in a large organization and have since kept in communication with physicians in the same very large organization. That has not been the case. So part of what is happening, is, I would say, confusion created in the media, which is where I came into play, because as soon as Roe versus Wade was abolished, or overturned, I felt that there was a good bit of, especially social media, confusion that was created around what consists of an emergency and that lives would be lost. Number one, understanding that with every abortion, a life is lost, guaranteed. So are we adding to the problem here with confusion? I think we are. But specifically, when it comes to, in organizations, practices that were focused on preserving life, there is no confusion there. And practices that have been performing abortions, they have been also traditionally very closely following the law in terms of what they can and cannot do. So I would push back on the idea that there are many physicians that are confused. Now, the ones that are not, they are more than welcome to call myself, call specifically to the Attorney General. He has a very open door policy. And finally to organizations like the Right to Life organizations, because their mission is to dispel the confusion. We're all here to help, all here to preserve life and here to help.
Can you tell us which large organization that is that you're referencing, where this confusion is to?
I'd like to leave that out, but I am in communication with many physicians across the country and in Louisiana. And so my experience has been that, just plainly said, that there hasn't been much confusion. Large organizations in Louisiana have typically been, have not performed elective abortions. So
Correct.
they're
We're
continuing
not
on.
I'm not talking about elective abortions. My understanding from hearing what these doctors had to say, again, these are not people who have signed on to the lawsuit challenging the law. They're not coming to public comment. They're simply literally asking LBH some questions, is there's now a lot of confusion about stuff that they used to do and how they proceed. And I'm not gonna argue with you, but I would say this was a doctor from Women's, a doctor from LSU Shreveport, and a doctor from Oshner saying this. All of them said that there were these like committee meetings with attorneys. So I don't know. I'm not trying to be like abrasive, but at some point you all kind of are. You're saying this is a media problem, but at some point we have got to listen to doctors who are coming forward and saying, I couldn't terminate a pregnancy the way I had to wait for someone to bleed a lot before I could do that.
Well, in this
couldn't,
case,
you
I
know.
would. I mean, the message would then be, yes, let's come together and have this as an open discussion. If enough physicians come up from both sides, the Attorney General is very hands-on, helpful. Jeff Landry has been nothing but someone who tries to help dispel confusion and help everybody come together. So perhaps this can generate a potential solution for physicians to help in that legal sphere. I think you bring up a very good point.
Okay, maybe it's a question for Ben. Ben, with this discussion around confusion with the law, kind of regardless of where these emails and so on, but it seems like there is confusion from some doctors somewhere in the state about what this law applies to. And I'm wondering what you see your organization's role in addressing that confusion, or is that something that is down to the Attorney General, something that's down to LDH, something that's down to the legislature?
Well, I think anybody who's involved in any way with legislation, from legislators to, the Attorney General didn't, create the legislation. The job of the Attorney General is to defend the law, right? And then when asked, to interpret the law. So, I think everybody has a shared role to try to make legislation and laws as best as possible, right? To accomplish the goals that they're set out to accomplish. We're certainly not the end-all and be-all of these laws, but we'd like to work with anybody and participate with legislators as they strive to improve the laws and provide any insights that we can of how to do that. There's going to be good ideas from physicians out there, and certainly it'd be good for those to be brought forward and have those discussed, and maybe they're being discussed and worked on as we speak with state representatives and senators right now. We're still, 5-6 months out from the session, so there's time to address these issues and to bring them up and to look to improve the laws in as best ways as possible. Like I said earlier, we don't want there to be confusion with good medical practice in the state, life-affirming practice that is striving to care for the mother and the child. We want to see that improved, and we hope we can all work together to do that.
I think a lot of the confusion is also born out of the fear of the criminal punishments that doctors could face should they perform an illegal abortion under this law. And Louisiana has a doctor shortage, and there's been medical students who say they're going to get their education here and then get out of Louisiana because they fear these steep punishments. Would those criminal punishments be something in the law that you would be willing to revisit and discuss in a future legislation?
I think it's important to reiterate that, the law repeatedly addresses that, it defers to the good faith medical judgment of physicians in these emergency situations. And there's definitely some allowance by the law to trust physicians to address these situations. As I've said before, we're happy to look and evaluate legislation, take a look at ideas and everything that's associated with it. Certainly, as Louisiana Right to Life, it's our goal to continue to ensure that elective abortion, ensure that we can protect unborn children from elective abortion. So we're going to evaluate everything in that light.
It's a two-part question, so listen to both parts.
All right.
Does the organization have a stand on the death penalty?
Okay.
And if it does have a stand, and it's consistent with other pro-life stances, when you're rubbing elbows with legislators and the Attorney General and others who support the death penalty, what's that conversation like? Do you do any kind of advocacy for other types of right to life issues?
Sure. Well, our organization does not take a position on the death penalty. It's been a historic position that we've not taken a position. There have been people who've been involved with us that support the death penalty. Personally, I oppose the death penalty. That's my personal opinion, but it's not something that we as an organization take a position on. We in Louisiana, to our credit, we have friends with a wide variety of political views on a wide variety of subjects. If you look at the authors who support our legislation and who are authoring our legislation, we have people with very strong views on that issue across the aisle, in a sense. So, we respect the difference of opinion on that, and we don't take a position.
Are they being hypocritical?
We don't take a position on the issue, so I don't think.
Yes or no question. Are they being hypocritical?
I think that because of our neutrality on the issue, I think I will not answer that question because.
Personal opinion, not as an organization.
And again, I still think that is not what my role is in this organization to do and address that. Time? Was that a clap for time or congratulations? I'm not sure. I don't know how this works.
I know. I have one. I mean, this is my.
That's up to you guys, not me.
There are a lot of problems right now in both our child welfare system, our foster care system, and the Office of Juvenile Justice and juvenile detention centers. I guess we had learned over the weekend, and I'm wondering if I think if we have more children, presumably we hope that, an abortion ban means more children, right? Right?
Well, every child's precious, and every child defends. We're always, no matter what comes down the road, we're always going to want to protect the rights of children who are born in the same way that we are going to protect children who are waiting to be born.
Specifically with the Department of Children and Family Services, which is where foster care is housed. I know you know that best.
Sure.
Do you support any sort of increase in funding or at least a reworking of funding, something that would expand their services given the DOPS decision?
Right. Well, let me just say that we're all in support of foster care, adoptions, and parents being foster care. We've been involved with this. Sarah, our Director of Communications, has actually been a strong advocate across the country in advocating for more involvement of the pro-life movement in foster care, which is motivated by her experience of being not trying to put words in your mouth, but we've talked about it enough, so that Sarah talks about it publicly as well of her story, and she can certainly address that. So we want to encourage pro-life people, pro-life citizens, pro-life groups, churches, whatever, to be engaged in the foster care system. Let me say that we find our place and our role as an organization, because of course we can only do so much as an organization, we find our role to be involved in an infant adoption and the promotion of that, because we believe when children are placed for infant adoption that they, great outcomes for the child can be a result of that. And so that's, we're probably not going to be the organization that's leading on foster care simply because we're going to be trying to focus to make sure that infant adoption is promoted. And we don't see that promoted and engaged on really enough many times in the situation. To the comment of funding, I can't say that I'm an expert enough on these issues we rarely get involved in, if ever. I don't think we've ever been involved in what departments should have this much money and this much. So, we want to see we hope the state can do their best and with the resources of the state to promote foster care, infant adoption, these other solutions for favorable outcomes for children.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
That was probably a lot.